Picture this. Tom Bradley stands weathered and bewildered in the early morning mist of his Wyoming ranch, witnessing something that challenges everything he understands about livestock behavior. His herd of 28 cattle, normally dispersed across the rolling grassland at dawn, has gathered in a tight cluster around a massive granite boulder that has sat undisturbed on his property for decades. Each animal takes its turn pressing against the ancient stone, tongues working methodically across its surface with an intensity that borders on obsession. What began 3 weeks ago as curious behavior has transformed into an all-consuming ritual that dominates the entire herd's daily routine. They barely graze anymore, instead returning repeatedly to this weathered piece of stone with unwavering determination. Neighbors passing by in pickup trucks slow down to chuckle at what appears to be an amusing livestock quirk. But Tom recognizes the fierce purpose in his animals' actions. This isn't entertainment. This is survival instinct. The cattle's massive bodies press against each other in their eagerness to reach the boulder, yet they persist in their peculiar worship with the intensity of creatures drawn to something essential, something critical. Tom had no idea that his herd wasn't simply attracted to an ordinary rock. They were desperately seeking nutrients that had been seeping through the earth for millions of years, and their ancient geological feast was about to transform his failing ranch into an extraordinary windfall. Let me transport you to the beginning of this remarkable tale. Tom Bradley had devoted his adult life to maintaining the struggling cattle operation that had been in his family for 3 generations. Following his father's death 5 years earlier, he'd inherited the 2,800-acre ranch nestled in the windswept valleys of southeastern Wyoming, along with mounting debts, aging equipment, and the constant pressure of fluctuating beef prices. The property supported 200 head of mixed-breed cattle, all descendants of bloodlines his grandfather had carefully selected in the 1960s. Tom's expertise in cattle management had earned him respect among local ranchers and agricultural extension agents. More significantly, it had earned him the loyalty of animals who had thrived under his careful stewardship despite the ranch's financial struggles. His cattle represented his primary income source. The hardy Angus Hereford cross had adapted perfectly to Wyoming's harsh climate, producing quality beef calves that commanded decent prices at regional markets. Tom had spent countless hours learning their individual personalities, understanding their grazing patterns, monitoring their health, and ensuring their nutritional needs were met throughout the demanding seasonal cycles. The boulder in question sat approximately half a mile from the main ranch buildings, positioned in the center of what Tom called the South Pasture. He'd always assumed it was glacial debris, one of countless granite stones scattered across the Wyoming landscape by ancient ice movements. The rock measured roughly 12 feet in length and stood nearly 6 feet high, weathered smooth by decades of wind and precipitation. Tom had often used it as a landmark when giving directions to visitors or marking boundary lines for rotational grazing schedules. The autumn sun cast long shadows across the prairie grass as Tom conducted his morning rounds, notebook ready, completing his daily livestock check. Everything had been completely routine until 3 weeks ago when Tom noticed the first unusual gathering. It was a crisp Tuesday morning in late September when Tom first witnessed his cattle's peculiar attraction. He was performing his weekly pasture rotation, moving the herd from the eastern grazing area to fresh grass in the south pasture when something captured his attention. Instead of spreading out to feed as they normally would, the entire herd had congregated around the familiar granite boulder, their behavior unlike anything he'd observed in 25 years of ranching. This wasn't particularly alarming. Cattle occasionally used large rocks for rubbing against or as shelter from wind. However, something felt different about their focus, something purposeful about how they were interacting with the stone's surface. After careful observation, Tom watched as cow after cow approached the boulder and began methodically licking its surface, their pink tongues working across the granite with obvious satisfaction. He recorded the observation in his ranch log, thinking it might represent mineral-seeking behavior, though he couldn't understand why they would suddenly develop such specific geological appetites. The following morning revealed the entire herd gathered around the boulder before sunrise. Within a week, their daily routine had completely reorganized around these mysterious licking sessions. Tom attempted to redirect their attention by placing fresh hay and mineral blocks in distant sections of the pasture, but the cattle showed minimal interest in anything except their granite fixation. Other local ranchers began noticing the behavior. Jake Morrison, who owned the neighboring spread and had worked with livestock for over 30 years, mentioned during their weekly coffee meeting at the Elkhorn Cafe that he'd never seen anything comparable. Sarah Whitman, the county extension agent, recommended close monitoring while avoiding interference unless the animals displayed signs of illness or nutritional deficiency. Tom desperately wanted to believe this was merely an unusual but harmless behavioral phase. However, his ranching instincts suggested otherwise. There was urgency in the cattle's movements, a single-minded determination that intensified daily. When he attempted to drive the herd away from the Boulder during one afternoon roundup, their resistance sent concern through his experienced rancher's intuition. The cattle had always been manageable during pasture rotations, responding predictably to his border collie's herding commands and his own directional calls. But when he tried to move them away from their granite obsession, the entire herd exhibited stubborn resistance that bordered on panic. Several cows vocalized distress calls he'd never heard before, and the whole group seemed to experience genuine anxiety when separated from their daily licking ritual. The message was unmistakable. This rock had become critically important to their well-being. Tom retreated immediately, his pulse elevated as he struggled to process what he'd witnessed. In decades of working with cattle, he had rarely encountered such determined resistance to his management decisions. The herd's protective behavior suggested this wasn't random activity. It was something they deemed essential for their survival. That evening, Tom remained in the south pasture well past sunset, positioned in his pickup truck in the gathering darkness, watching the cattle's silhouettes as they continued gathering around the boulder even after temperatures dropped. The rhythmic sound of tongues against stone echoed through the quiet valley, and he couldn't escape the conviction that he was missing something vital, something that would explain this sudden and intense behavioral transformation. His phone buzzed with a text from his daughter studying veterinary science at Colorado State University. "Dad, got your video of the cattle. My professors are stumped. Maybe call Dr. Patterson for a field consultation?" Tom had shared footage of the behavior with several contacts, hoping someone might provide insights into what he was observing. Thus far, none of the specialists he'd contacted had encountered anything similar. As he watched his herd carefully position themselves around different sections of the boulder with surprising organization, Tom reached a decision that would change everything. Tomorrow he would contact Dr. Margaret Patterson, the large animal veterinarian who had served ranchers in the region for 15 years, and he would begin seeking explanations beyond traditional livestock management. Something was compelling his cattle to focus on this ancient piece of granite, and he was determined to understand what it was before his animals suffered any consequences. The situation intensified the following Monday morning when Tom discovered his cattle's behavior had reached concerning levels. Where they had previously spent several hours daily at the boulder before resuming normal grazing, they were now committed to remaining near the stone throughout daylight hours. The herd had lost interest in prime pasture grass, instead clustering around their granite attraction with an obsessiveness that alarmed Tom's ranching sensibilities. More troubling was their apparent weight loss. Despite the excellent autumn weather for building winter reserves, several cows appeared noticeably thinner, and their body condition scores were declining from nutritional stress. Tom watched with mounting anxiety as his prize breeding cow struggled to reach a section of the boulder that other cattle were monopolizing, her normally robust frame showing signs of the competition for access to whatever substance they were seeking. During his morning consultation with Dr. Patterson over the phone, Tom explained his observations with growing frustration. "They've lost interest in supplemental minerals. Hey, even the premium grain mix I use for conditioning," he explained, reviewing the feeding records on his clipboard. "Their behavior has become completely focused on that boulder, and I'm starting to see physical deterioration in my best animals." Dr. Patterson listened carefully to his description before responding. This degree of behavioral fixation combined with reduced feed intake suggests we're dealing with something more complex than typical mineral-seeking behavior. I can drive out Thursday morning to examine the rock and test your animals. We need to determine whether they're accessing something beneficial or potentially harmful. Tom spent the intervening days in anxious observation, documenting his cattle's condition and trying to understand their granite obsession. The herd had essentially established a permanent camp around the boulder, with animals taking turns accessing different surfaces while others waited patiently for their opportunity. It resembled a carefully organized system rather than chaotic animal behavior. Dr. Patterson arrived on Thursday at precisely 9:30, her veterinary truck loaded with testing equipment and sample containers. Tom met her at the ranch entrance. His stomach knotted with concern as he guided her toward the south pasture where his cattle maintained their geological vigil. As they approached the boulder, Dr. Patterson examined the scene with professional interest. "I've treated mineral deficiencies in livestock for over a decade, but I've never seen animals exhibit such focused attention on a single geological formation. It's almost as though they've discovered a concentrated source of something essential." The veterinarian began her examination by collecting surface samples from various sections of the boulder, particularly areas that showed obvious evidence of repeated licking. She then conducted basic health assessments on several cattle, checking their body condition, examining their mucous membranes, and drawing blood samples for nutritional analysis. "Physically, your animals appear healthy despite their weight loss," Dr. Patterson observed, completing her examination of the herd. "Their behavior suggests they're responding to some chemical or mineral presence in this rock that we can't readily identify. The granite itself appears ordinary, but something is compelling them to seek whatever they're finding here." The initial field tests revealed nothing obviously harmful or beneficial about the boulder's surface composition. Standard mineral analysis showed typical granite components: feldspar, quartz, mica, nothing that would explain such intense animal interest. Dr. Patterson collected additional samples for more comprehensive laboratory analysis, promising to contact Tom within a week with detailed results. Tom spent the following days in mounting frustration, watching his valuable cattle continue their obsessive behavior while awaiting test results that might explain their mysterious attraction. The financial pressure of his struggling ranch operation made every day of reduced productivity a significant concern, particularly with winter approaching and feed costs mounting. The phone call came on Tuesday afternoon while Tom was repairing fence line in the eastern pasture. Dr. Patterson's voice carried a note of confusion that immediately captured his attention. "Tom, the laboratory results are puzzling. The surface samples show elevated levels of calcium and various trace minerals, but nothing unusual enough to explain your cattle's behavior. However, the concentrations are significantly higher than typical granite formations would produce." Tom felt his heart sink as the implications became clear. "So you're saying the rock itself isn't the source of whatever they're seeking?" "That's exactly what I'm suggesting. The mineral concentrations we're detecting appear to be leaching upward through the soil from some subsurface source. Something underneath that boulder is creating the chemical attraction your cattle are responding to." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes as Dr. Patterson explained the technical aspects of her findings and recommended next steps. The elevated mineral levels suggested an underground source that was gradually seeping upward through soil layers and concentrating on the boulder's surface through natural evaporation processes. Tom hung up the phone with a growing realization that his cattle's behavior might be more scientifically significant than simple livestock management concerns. That evening, he called his neighbor Jake Morrison to borrow the excavation equipment necessary to investigate what lay beneath his mysterious granite attraction. The excavation began at dawn on Friday morning with Jake operating his backhoe while Tom and Dr. Patterson observed from a safe distance. The cattle had been temporarily relocated to an adjacent pasture, where they spent the morning lowing plaintively toward their displaced boulder and pacing along the fence line in obvious distress. The first several feet of digging revealed typical prairie soil and small stones. However, as the excavator reached approximately 8 feet in depth, Jake's experienced eye detected something unusual in the displaced earth. "Tom, you need to see this," he called, shutting down the machinery and climbing from the cab with obvious excitement. Embedded in the dark soil were fragments of what appeared to be fossilized bone, creamy white against the brown earth, and clearly too large and structured to belong to any modern animal. Dr. Patterson immediately recognized the significance of their discovery and insisted they cease excavation until paleontological experts could be contacted. The call to the University of Wyoming's geology department resulted in an emergency response that transformed Tom's quiet ranch into a bustling scientific expedition within 48 hours. Dr. Rebecca Chun, a paleontologist specializing in Jurassic period fossils, arrived with a full excavation team and immediately identified the bone fragments as belonging to a juvenile Allosaurus, one of the most sought-after predatory dinosaur specimens in North American paleontology. The careful excavation that followed revealed a nearly complete skeleton preserved in remarkable condition, positioned directly beneath the granite boulder that had served as an accidental memorial marker for millions of years. The dinosaur's bones had been slowly releasing calcium, phosphorus, and trace minerals into the surrounding soil through natural chemical processes, creating an underground mineral deposit that gradually worked its way to the surface. Your cattle detected a geological treasure that has been hidden here since the late Jurassic period, Dr. Chun explained as her team carefully exposed sections of the fossil. The mineral leaching from these bones created exactly the type of natural salt lick that livestock instinctively seek. They were responding to 150 million years of chemical preservation. Tom watched in amazement as the excavation revealed vertebrae, ribs, leg bones, and skull fragments that Dr. Chun described as museum-quality specimens. The discovery represented not only a significant paleontological find, but also a potential solution to his ranch's financial struggles. The legal and financial negotiations that followed were handled by specialists from the university and the Wyoming Geological Survey. Since the fossil was discovered on private property, Tom retained ownership rights while the university expressed immediate interest in acquisition for research and display purposes. 3 months later, Tom signed the final papers transferring ownership of the Allosaurus specimen to the University of Wyoming's paleontology collection for $2.3 million, the highest price ever paid for a dinosaur fossil discovered in the region. The sale provided sufficient funds to pay off the ranch's accumulated debts, upgrade equipment and facilities, and establish an endowment that would ensure the operation's financial stability for future generations. The story attracted national media attention, evolving from a simple livestock mystery into a powerful example of animal instincts and accidental scientific discovery. Videos of Tom's cattle obsessively licking the boulder were viewed millions of times, with comments from viewers worldwide expressing amazement at the animal's ability to detect a fossil treasure that had remained hidden from human detection for decades. Dr. Chin published a comprehensive study about the discovery in the Journal of Vertebrate Paleontology, noting how the cattle's behavior provided the key to locating a specimen that might have remained buried indefinitely. "We must consider the possibility," she wrote, "that livestock behavior can serve as an indicator of significant geological phenomena that conventional exploration methods might miss." 6 months after the excavation, Tom stood once again in his south pasture, watching his cattle graze contentedly across grass that was now supported by improved irrigation and fertilization systems funded by his fossil windfall. The boulder had been relocated to a place of honor near his ranch entrance, accompanied by a bronze plaque that read, "In recognition of the cattle whose instincts led to the discovery of the Morrison Allosaurus." The cattle had shown no inclination to seek out their former geological obsession, apparently satisfied that their mineral needs were now met through conventional supplementation. The ranch's success story had drawn visitors from around the region, all eager to hear about the famous intuitive herd that had detected prehistoric treasure. But Tom understood the truth was both simpler and more remarkable than supernatural abilities. His cattle had simply been responding to their environment in ways that humans, with their dependence on modern technology and dismissal of animal wisdom, had failed to recognize. As he watched his herd peacefully grazing in the afternoon sun, occasionally pausing to investigate interesting scents before moving on to fresh grass, Tom reflected on everything the experience had taught him about truly paying attention to his animals' behavior. He'd spent decades managing their welfare, but it had taken nearly losing his ranch to realize that sometimes the most valuable communications were the ones that seemed most bewildering. The agricultural community had embraced Tom's story as a reminder that livestock behavior often contained information that experienced ranchers should investigate rather than dismiss. Several universities had begun researching animal responses to geological phenomena, recognizing that domestic animals might serve as early detection systems for subsurface resources that conventional exploration might overlook. 2 years later, the Bradley Ranch had become a model operation for sustainable cattle management and had established partnerships with paleontological research programs throughout the Rocky Mountain region. Tom found himself traveling to agricultural conferences and university programs to speak about the importance of treating animal behavior as valuable intelligence rather than mere biological response. But perhaps the most significant change was in Tom's daily routine. Each morning as he made his rounds through the various pastures, he spent additional time observing his animals' interactions with their environment, not just monitoring their physical health and productivity, but listening, truly listening to what they might be attempting to communicate about the land they shared. His cattle had taught him that wisdom appears in countless forms, and sometimes the most important discoveries arise not through technology or education, but through the patient, persistent actions of creatures trying to satisfy their needs in ways that might ultimately benefit everyone involved, even when the humans responsible for their care don't initially comprehend what they're trying to accomplish. The herd that had once gathered around a boulder in urgent mineral seeking now spent their days in peaceful satisfaction, confident that their message had finally been understood. And Tom had discovered that sometimes the greatest breakthrough is simply acknowledging that the animals in his care might understand aspects of their environment that he did not, and having the wisdom to investigate when they attempt to share that knowledge through their behavior.